Talofa, malo lele, bunavanaka, kia ora ana. So welcome to this video in the Alexander series. This one is going to be called The Rise of Macedonia. If you remember in the previous video, we looked at the Persian invasion and how the Greeks were eventually victorious, but they wanted revenge on Persia for what the Persians had done, destroying the cities, killing thousands and desecrating the sacred shrines. So in the collective Greek mind was this desire for revenge to invade the Persian Empire. The big question was to be led by whom? Not only whom, but which city-state? Because as you hopefully know, the Greek city-states were notorious for fighting each other rather than being any sort of unified force. So we come to the rise of Macedonia. Now, we do need to remember that the rest of the Greeks weren't even sure that the Macedonians were Greek. They had different ways, they had different customs, for example, polygamy. The Macedonian kings could marry more than one wife, as Philip, the father of Alexander, did at least 6 or 7 times. Now, the Macedonians, they spoke Greek and they worshipped the same gods, although the Greek was with quite a thick accent. And the rest of the Greeks weren't even sure the Macedonians deserved to be Greek. They saw them as barbarous, they saw them as uncivilized, they saw them as brutish. However, the Macedonians were convinced that they were Greek, and what we see now in our story is the rise of the power of Macedonia. So after the Persian Wars, just a quick recap, we have what we've known as the Golden Age of Athens in particular. Athens becomes the most powerful city-state in the Mediterranean. Wealthy, influential, this is the time of philosophy, this is the time of fantastic buildings. This is the time when Athens reaches its apogee of influence in the Mediterranean world. All that ended with the disastrous Peloponnesian War that Athens fought with Sparta, and the Spartans were victorious, and Athens then fell down from its position as the most powerful Greek city-state. But it did leave up a sort of power vacuum. Which state is the most powerful in all of Greece? Well, why were the Greeks always fighting? Well, there's constant conflict between these Greek city-states. You can see the main ones are marked there on our map. You know, the might of Athens and Thebes and Argos in particular, and Sparta in the south. There's constant conflict between these city-states. Alliances were waxing and waned. You know, one year you'll be fighting alongside one city-state, and the next year you'll be fighting against them. So there's constant conflict, and there's what we call a power vacuum, as in no city-state is actually the most powerful. But then those rough northerners start to flex their muscles, and we see the rise of Macedonia under its king Philip II, the father of Alexander. And he became king at 21 with the almost suspicious death of his brother. Inherited a state that was in absolute turmoil, it was unstable, it was unsafe. Philip had spent some time in the city of Thebes as a hostage previously as a young man, and he had seen the might of the Theban army, and he'd seen how the Thebans did things, excuse me, and he took those lessons home with him. When he became king, he executed his half-brothers because they would have a claim to the throne, so he had to get rid of them. That's quite normal. And he used a mix of diplomacy, alliances, bribes, and gifts to secure the boundaries of his kingdom. In particular, Philip used marriage a lot. He himself ended up marrying 7 wives, and he married off any female in his extended family to princes of different areas in Greece to secure alliances and thus make Macedonia safe. Macedonia, though perhaps uncivilized, was extraordinarily rich with gold and silver mines in particular. So Philip was able to use that wealth to essentially bribe or give gifts to surrounding states that would secure the stability of his kingdom. Philip would fight if he needed to, but he would always rather use diplomacy, and he would rather talk first and see if there can be a solution. Because war is costly. Not only should Philip be successful, but it's costly in terms of material and men expended. So far better to use the wealth of his kingdom to secure its safety. Philip's masterstroke in reforming the army was introducing the Sarissa. This was a 5-meter long spear, as you can see in this diagram here, which did require 2 hands to wield. The thing about this is if your spear is 5 meters long, you're able to keep the enemy at least 3.5 meters away from you. Greek warfare at the time did not use spears that were longer than 2 meters, and Philip introduces the Sarissa, which completely changes warfare. He trains his army, his phalanx, this is called, the wedge-shaped formation, to fight with the Sarissa in the diagram you see here. It's like a movable porcupine that was almost impenetrable to enemy missiles. And this had the effect of changing warfare. Philip was able to go, once he'd secured his kingdom with diplomacy, bribes and gifts and so on, and marriages, he was able to now strike against those city-states who had threatened him with this highly efficient, highly disciplined, highly trained Macedonian army wielding the 5-meter-long Sarissa. The Greeks had never seen the likes of this before. Suddenly they were up against this formidable fighting force that seemingly had come from nowhere. And the rest of the Greeks started to fall down one by one to the power of Philip and his army and the Sarissa. Philip was thus able to extend Macedonian influence now that his city-state was safe and he had such an army. And he went through conquered cities, he kept up the marriages, kept creating alliances. It was better to create an alliance with Philip now than risk being destroyed by his highly efficient army. Athens became seriously concerned. It seemed that their position as previous top dog was about to be challenged by these northerners. Demosthenes, who was an Athenian politician and speechwriter, he was an outspoken critic of Philip, and he was constantly declaring that Athenians must fight Philip and must reduce the power of Macedon to extend its influence. Well, this constant warfare continued because there's a desire for wealth. If there's poverty, Philip needs wealth. The kings need wealth. They need wealth to give to their citizens, ensure they stay on the throne, and ensure their city-states as powerful. Far better to go and invade another city-state and take their wealth to secure your own kingdom. So this carries on. Now, Macedonia does become more and more powerful, and the idea becomes in Philip's head to invade Persia. But first he's got to secure Greece. However, the Persians, they are not expected to provide any sort of resistance. Not only the Macedonians, but all of the Greeks were convinced that any invasion of Persia will ultimately be successful to the Greeks because the Persians are weak and they are unmanly. For example, the Persians wear trousers. The men wear trousers, which is seen as terrifically unmanly. Real men wear skirts in the ancient world. And also the Persians, individual soldiers are nowhere near as efficient as the Greeks are. The Persian king has always relied on his numbers to win battles, just pouring in thousands and thousands and thousands of more men because he can do that because his empire is so vast. This is similar to the Russians in World War I and to some extent in World War II, just sending in thousands and thousands and thousands of men. The death toll doesn't really matter because there's more men who can replace them, and in the end they'll overwhelm the enemy. An invasion of Persia would allow the Greeks to seize the wealth and the slaves of Persia, and many of the Greek cities perhaps will no longer fight each other because they'll all be incredibly wealthy. That's unlikely to happen, but anyway. The Athenian politician Isocrates, so he was in opposition to Demosthenes, he wrote to Philip and said, "You must work for the good of the Hellenes, the Greeks. Extend your power of as many barbarians as possible. You, Philip, essentially are the one to lead a Greek invasion of Persia." We come to the Battle of Karna in 338 BC, which is when the power of Macedon was solidified. Philip defeated a Greek alliance led by Thebes in particular, and Philip and Alexander became the most powerful in all of Greece. Philip needed to quash any Greek resistance to his rule so he could lead an invasion of Persia. And it needed to be what we call a pan-Hellenic, which means all of Greece. Philip is the one to lead an all-Greek, a pan-Hellenic invasion of Persia. The Macedonian phalanx is devastating at the Battle of Karna, defeating this Greek alliance. Alexander fought on the left wing, as Father Philip on the right, and the story goes that Alexander and his cavalry led the devastating blow and crushed the elite Theban sacred band, who are, I guess, like the special forces, the commandos, the marines of the ancient world, and Alexander absolutely crushed them. The Theban sacred band are interesting in that it was they who had last defeated the Spartans, which began the Spartan decline. But the Theban sacred band was reputedly made up of 150 pairs of male lovers. The idea being that one would fight to defend his lover, but also would fight to not be disgraced by his lover. And that is actually what happened. The Theban sacred band, they died to a man, destroyed by Alexander on the left wing, with all their wounds to the front of their bodies, so they did not try to run away. Victory here left Macedon, or Macedonia, as the undisputed power in Greece. Philip was so impressed by the bravery of the Theban sacred band that he erected this stone lion here over their gravesite, which you can see in this modern day photo. That stone lion is partly reconstructed. The remains were found and painstakingly put together, and in that gravesite there lie the bodies of some 200 plus soldiers who are presumed to be the Theban sacred band, because that is where the sources tell us that they fought and died. So what does the impact of this victory mean? Well, Philip is now awarded the title of hegemon, which doesn't mean king of Greece, it means the most powerful king in all of Greece. He's not the king of Greece, he's the most powerful king. He is the hegemon. Philip, part of the hegemon title is that the rest of the Greeks must respect the king and his descendants. So they must respect Philip's position as the hegemon of Greece and respect also his descendants. So Philip is already looking at playing the long game here. The established after the Battle of Karna is the League of Corinth, which was signed in 337 BC, and this brought all the Greek states together under Macedonian control, except Sparta. Sparta refused to be part of it, and it's a sign of the now weakness of Sparta that Philip was not concerned the Spartans could go back to being Spartan down the bottom of Greece. And what under the League of Corinth brings finally the Greek states to stop fighting each other, because it's actually quite basic, but it's incredibly influential. If one of the Greek city-states was to be an aggressor, was to invade another Greek city-state, then all the Greek city-states were bound to attack the aggressor. So what this means under the League of Corinth and Philip's leadership is that the rest of the Greek states are not fighting each other, which is hugely significant in of itself. Philip, finally, someone has brought the Greeks together, and they do have their own freedom. They're not ruled by Philip, as long as they obey his commands and provide forces for an invasion of Persia and don't attack each other, because if you did attack the other, you would be destroyed. So Persia is now the plan, and in 336, Philip sends 10,000 soldiers as an advance guard to establish a beachhead on Persian territory. And that brings to a close our story of the rise of Macedon. Philip and his kingdom are now the most powerful city-state in all of Greece.